applications and system monitoring. System applications covers an easy-to-use tools, the tools for certifications and other tasks that are not often performed. And these are going to be things like our cylinder gas audits that are done quarterly for Part 60, Part 75, linearity tests, the RADAs, and where do we put this information in StackVision and how we can better use StackVision to use these tools. When we talk about our quarterly QA, Part 75 does a linearity check, and the whole purpose behind this is to ensure that our analyzers increase in equal increments corresponding with the injected gas that we put into the system. For us to do a linearity, we have to have 168 operating hours within our QA operating quarter. So that means that our units have to operate for at least 168 hours, and that's indicated by online time, whatever your online time parameter is. If we don't have 168 hours within that operating period, then operating quarter, then we do not have to do our linearities. We also have a 168-hour grace period into the next quarter if we were not able to do our linearity in that particular quarter. So my boss has me working so hard and so busy that I just don't have the opportunity to do my linearity in this particular quarter. So I have 168 hours into the next one that I can do that particular linearity, but it will count towards the previous quarter. If the current quarter has 168 operating hours, then another linearity is going to be required for that particular quarter, and it must be at least 30 days apart from the first test. So I can't do a linearity today that counts towards the previous quarter and then do one tomorrow for this quarter. No, I've got to wait at least 30 days. 3 injections at low, at mid, and at high for a total of 9 injections. Part 60 does a cylinder gas audit, and this is the same type of a test as the linearity, but the differences here are it is done 3 of the 4 calendar quarters. Operating hours are not taken into consideration. There is no grace period, and of course certain exceptions apply to particular subparts, just like I've been saying all week long. It just depends. So the 4th quarter of the 4 calendar quarters, it's thought that the relative accuracy test audit would be the test for that particular quarter. 3 injections at 2 levels for a total of 6 injections. Now, if you have a parameter that falls in under both Part 75 and Part 60, there is what's called the harmonization rules. And the harmonization rules state that you can do the more stringent test of the 2 to satisfy the needs for both. So basically what that means is that you can do the linearity, and that will satisfy both the CGA and the linearity requirements. When we think about our linearities and our CGAs, we have to think about the span and range, because that is what we're looking at and being used to calculate the results. The EPA wants to the most practicable extent, make sure that the majority of your readings fall between 20 and 80% of the range of the instrument. So that 20 to 80% is what we consider the span. Now, of course, we just don't look at it willy-nilly and say, okay, well, the range of my instrument is blah, 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 so I'll go ahead and just throw it in between here and there. There is actually math and formulas that are associated with the span and the range. The span is calculated at 1 to 1.2 times percent the maximum potential concentration, and then rounded up. The maximum potential concentrations are going to come from the Code of Federal Regulations, and depending upon the parameter that we're using. And there's lots of maximums that come into play when we think about the formulas and the calculations. We have maximum emission rate, maximum flow, all these different maximums that are being used. But for this purpose of span, we're using the maximum potential concentration. And Cody, you will be able to review this, because I'm recording the sessions, and that session will be up tomorrow. and you'll be able to get that. Sorry that you're being called away. That's one of the problems of being at work and trying to do some training. Right. So our span, again, calculated at 1 to 1.25 times the maximum potential concentration. And that's what we're going to use when we look at our linearities and our CGAs. If you think about your car, maybe this will help make it more understandable. If you think about your car goes from 0 to 120 with your speedometer. But you don't operate your car at 0, nor do you operate it at 120. But you operate it between 30 and maybe 80, depending upon where you live. So the range would be the 0 to 120, but the span would be the 30 to 80. All right, and again, the EPA wants the majority of your readings to the most practical extent to be between 20 to 80% of the range, and it is greater than or equal to the span value for the range. The level is going to be depending upon which we're running, the low, the mid, or the high. And then when we look at our injection levels, this is what we're looking at. We're looking at the range, we're looking at the span, and the span is being used to make sure that we're where we need to be. So in this particular case, we have a span of 500, and we are doing the linearity at the low level, which is 20 to 30% of the span. So we need a value between 100 and 150. Then the mid-level is going to be the 50 to 60% of the span, or 250 to 300. And then the high level would be 80 to 100% of the span, or 400 to 500. All right, the question about the maximum potential concentration, can that be set to whatever you want? No, you cannot set the maximum potential concentration to whatever you want. So to speak, you can't go willy-nilly with those and just throw whatever numbers you want in there. There are certain requirements that you would find in the Code of Federal Regulations, depending upon what the analyzer is or the parameter that you're monitoring, so which analyzer is being used, what controls are being associated with that. Are you using O2 as a diluent? Just all these different factors that go into what the maximum potential concentration is. But again, you can find those in the tables in the CFR, the Code of Federal Regulations, and that will help you better understand what the maximum potential concentration for NOx is, for SO2, for CO2, and it's all laid out for you. But again, it's dependent upon the controls that you have installed and the parameters and the monitors that you're looking at. Maximum potential concentration during your annual span and range evaluation. All right, that's another good point that Nick brings up. The annual requirement is that you have to do an annual span and range evaluation. And what this does is StackVision, you can actually generate a report in StackVision, and you will pull the parameter that you want to look at, that you're going to do the span and range evaluation on, and it will go over the period of time and show you how many of your readings fall within the 20 to 80% and how many are outside of the 20 to 80%. So if the majority of the readings are falling between 20 to 80%, then we're doing good. However, if they're not, that might mean that we need to change the span and the range of our instrument. We do that by going into Stack Studio, updating our span and our range there, and also in our monitoring plans, if you're Part 75, you would update your span and range there as well. As long as you are within the 20 to 80% for the majority of your readings, you don't have to change anything. I hope that answers it for you, Nick, and that covers what it was you were asking. All right, for our linearity injection levels, a linearity test challenges each analyzer for a total of 9 tests, and no gas is to be used twice in succession. That means that I cannot do low, 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 mid, 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 high, high, high. I have to do low, mid, high, low, mid, high, low, mid, high. If I don't do it that way, then I'm not going to have a valid test. Now, our linearity error is calculated much like we saw yesterday with our calibration error. Our calibration error uses the equation A6, where our linearity error uses equation A4. And the difference between the two is with the calibration error, we're looking at the span of the instrument, but the linearity error, we're using the range, or the reference value rather. So the linearity error is the absolute value of the reference minus actual divided by the reference value times 100, and that reference value being the gas that we've used. To pass the linearity check, the error must be less than or equal to 5% for all 3 injection levels. So each level is independently calculated, and that level has to be less than 5% of the span. The SENS is deemed out of control if the linearity error exceeds 5%. Now, doing the math, sometimes it might be above the 5%. So in that case, we have what is called the alternate performance specification. And this can be used when that linearity error is greater than 5%. The alternate performance specification for SO2 and NOx, if the reference minus actual is less than or equal to 5 ppm, the level passes using APS, alternate performance specification, and the overall result would be that the test would pass APS, and that's considering the other levels pass as well. Now, it's okay if you use the alternate performance specification. It's not a problem. You're not going to get in trouble because you use the alternate performance. It's just another way of calculating it and giving you the results. For the O2 and CO2, the linearity error must be less than 5%, 0.5%. And the StackVision will first calculate the test results, and then using those results, it will go ahead and automatically assign the alternate performance specification if it needs to. Now in StackVision, we have the tool that we can go in and we can use, and that is the linearity/CGA tool. And all throughout StackVision, you're only going to see a separation between linearity and CGA, cylinder gas audits, when we look at the reporting end of it. But when we look at the tool to actually put that information in, it's under the linearity/CGA tool. Now, when we put the test in, StackVision is going to know, should this be a linearity or should this be a cylinder gas audit? And that's based upon the program that that particular parameter falls under. If it falls under Part 75, that's a linearity requirement. If it falls under Part 60 or permit, that's a cylinder gas audit. And StackVision will know what it's supposed to use based upon the configuration. They're calculated using the linearity and CGA tool, and we can get there just by selecting our tools, QA and certification, and linearity/CGA. And then based upon what it is in our system, what we're supposed to be using, StackVision will know what it should be. When we open this tool, we have 3 different sections of the tool. We have the records grid, and that can be when we select our records on the left-hand side, just like we saw with CalLab and the Data Lab tool. On the left side of your Task Explorer is going to be the year and the quarter that a test was actually put into the system. The year, the quarter, and then the source that that particular test applies to, and then the parameters that those tests apply to. Once we've selected what it is that we want to look at, those records will then be displayed in the main data section, and it will be a high level, passed, failed, what the test was, what level it was at, did we pass using APS, all the different pieces associated with the test. Then we have the test details page, which is going to show us all of the details associated with that particular test. Now, an important factor here is that last bullet point there, locked. If the test is marked as being locked, that means that it cannot be edited. Now, when I say it can't be edited, that means that you as a user cannot just go in and edit that particular test. That does not mean that the system will not edit those tests. And I know that's a little scary, and you're thinking, oh, what do you mean, the system? Well, let's say that we've gone in, we've done our linearity, and then we've run process now, and process now calculates one of the parameters that was used in the linearity. That may make an impact on the test itself, and not necessarily the test, but just the parameter value for that test. So just because you've locked it does not necessarily mean that nothing can impact that test. Now, there is another data locking option in StackVision, and that is the data locking wizard. And that's a tool that's available from the tools menu, data locking wizard. If you use that to lock your data, that is a hard lockdown. That's going to be used pretty much after you've submitted your information to the EPA or to the state or whatever, and you want to make sure that record stays the way it is. You would use your data locking wizard instead of just locking the actual test data itself. When we go to the Test Details tab, that's going to show us all of the details associated with the selected tests. Those tests are selected from the initially retrieved or loaded tests. So if we had a test that was in a quarter that we didn't select over here, then we're not going to see that test. We're only going to see what we've selected here on the first step. Data is only used as test data once it's entered into the tool and saved. Until a test is entered, the data is just data. There's lots of places within StackVision, I call them money in the bank, meaning the information is already there, but we have to tell StackVision what we want to use. And in this case, the information would already be in StackVision. We just have to tell StackVision to go out there, gather this information, and use it for the purpose of this test reporting. Typically, your linearities and your cylinder gas audits are going to be set up in a calibration sequence, and it would be considered a Q-type calibration sequence. Yesterday when we were in Cal Lab, we saw that we had different types of calibrations. We had the D for daily, the Q for quarterly, and all of those quarterlies would be your CGAs and your linearities. Now, if you don't have your system set up that way, you can use minute data as well. But the minute data is a little bit trickier, but we're going to see where we can use that just as well as the CGA or the calibration sequences. Data to compile a linearity or CGA can be the result of a Q-type calibration or from the minute data. Prior to entering the data, we have to know when that Q-type calibration was calculated, when it was conducted, or which minute that we want to use for the minute data. To add a new record, in other words, we're going to take that money from the bank, we're going to write that check now, we're going to select the add icon from our drop down, use Control N, use a right click or click add, or click edit and add. So lots of different ways that we'll be able to get that information into the system. Once the test is created, new injections can be added from the add icon. So what that means is that I might be doing a test and I'm going to put the information in as it occurs. So I start by adding a test, and that will set the stage for me, if you will. And then I can go in and add the additional levels as I need to. When we add from the linearity or the cylinder gas sequence the Q-type calibration, StackVision will retrieve and sort all of those Q-type calibrations that we had in our system. If it's been previously used to calculate and record the linearity, they can be filtered to hide those sequences that you've already used. And you see that at the bottom of this example where it says hide sequences already applied. So if we've already used that information, it won't let us do another one with that. but we can override that, and I'll show you that when we go into StackVision. To find those Q-type calibrations, we can find those a couple of different ways. We can go into the calibrations in CalLab and filter out all of our calibrations for Q-type calibrations. Or we can use our calibration detail report, and when we run that calibration detail report, instead of selecting all, we can just select quarterly calibrations. We can also use minute data, but we want to be careful when we're using minute data, because sometimes we might look and have the specific minute that we want to use. However, that reading might be different than what the StackVision minute reading is. Reason being is because StackVision averages that minute, and you may be looking at a exact minute, a moment in time, and getting a reading, and it might look just a little bit different than what you're seeing in the StackVision minute reading, and it might be a little confusing. So you want to be careful with using minute data to understand that and know that's where the information is coming from that you want to use. So once we've gone in and we've made all of our changes, we've put the information in, we've said this is what we want to use as a test, we have to remember to save it. However, that's a safety net as well. Once we put the test in, we're going to have unsaved changes in the left-hand column of that test to indicate that we have unsaved changes. Now, if you've put the information in and maybe you've picked the wrong parts or pieces and it doesn't look like it's going to work for your purpose, you can just exit out of it and don't save anything and then just come back in and start again. And that's easy to do. Maybe you've selected the wrong instances or you've selected the wrong parameter. Just cancel it out, come back in, and do it again. Because remember, nothing is committed to the database until we click Save. Now, if we've gone into our cylinder management tool as we saw yesterday, and we have associated a cylinder or put a cylinder into service for the quarterly type calibrations, then that information will be automatically pulled into the test itself. If we haven't done that, we have the option to go in after the test information has been put in and then select which particular gas bottles we want to use. We also have a link in that section that will take us into the cylinder management tool and allow us to add the cylinders at that point as well. So even though you don't have that information in there right away, there's always ways that it can get put in there and then be associated with the test. And this is exactly what I was talking about. We can go in, we can say this is the bottle that I want to use, but again, you want to be careful with that because you want to make sure that you put the right bottle on the right test. You don't want to be doing a SO2 linearity and grab a bottle that has no SO2 in it. So you want to make sure that you get that in there. And then once you've got everything where you need it to be, you can go ahead and click Save, and then that's going to be committed to your database. So let's go into StackVision, and let's look at some of these things that I've just talked about. And here we are back in StackVision, and remember, yesterday we talked about calibrations, and here I have my system design report brought up, my calibration sequences, my daily, that's what we talked about yesterday. And then as we scroll on down, we can see that we have Q types. So we have a QCO HCO2 with a low and a mid, 2 injections at each of the 3 levels. We have a COL1. So these are all my quarterly type calibrations that I'm looking at there. So I know I have some that are associated. If I go into my parameter detail report and I go to my linearity parameters, then I can see exactly what's going to be a linearity, because part 75 is linearity, and what is going to be CGA, because permit is CGA. And this is how StackVision is going to be able to determine what it is that we need to use. Now we can go into our reports, calibration detail, or we can go into CalLab And we can bring in all of our calibrations over the period of time that we want to look at. And I'm going to go back a little bit just so that I have lots of data to filter through. And when I bring this up, I'll go ahead and use my calibration type filter. And I will request that we use the daily, or the quarterly rather, the quarterly type calibrations. Filter that out and use quarterly. So now I can see that on 1/22 of 2016, I did a CO2 linearity. And I can also see that my values here, my low, my mid, my high, low, mid, high, low, mid, high. So that's when I did that actual test. And these values are going to be, remember, low is 20 to 30% of the span of the instrument, mid is 50 to 60, and high is 80 to 100. Well, if we go back over here to our parameter detail report, under our calibration settings, the span of my CO2 instrument is 20. So when I look at that CalLab piece, 20 to 30% of 20 would be 6, 50 to 60 would be 12, 80 to 100 would be 18. So we know that was being used for our linearity. So now that we know when the test was actually done, we can go into our tools, QA and certification, linearity/CGA. When we bring this up, we can look at all of the tests that have already been put into our system by selecting the filter options, if you will, on the left-hand side under selections. If I only wanted to look and see what was done in quarter 3 of 2020, I can just select quarter 3 of 2020. But I'm going to bring them all up just so that you can see them. So on this main page, we see the high level, when a test was done, what the overall result of that test was, whether we want to use it in the electronic data report for our quarterly reporting or not. And this is going to show us all of the different tests that are in our system. If I want to see the details of that particular test, I can double click on the test itself, or I can jump over to the test details page and see all of the tests as well. So here we have a CO2 linearity that was done in July of 2016. All of the information is populated based upon what our configuration is. This particular one was the high side. Span instrument, the instrument span was 20. It was done for periodic quality assurance. Now, if we were going to do some maintenance, and maybe we've done a QA and diagnostic test, this would be when we've done an abbreviated linearity. And an abbreviated linearity is going to be one where we have just one injection at all 3 levels. So if we were to do that and set that up, StackVision would see that as an incomplete test until we came over here and clicked on the abbreviated button, and then it would know, okay, we're using this as an abbreviated, and it would let us know whether we've passed or we've failed. An abbreviated linearity is going to be required for certain maintenance events that you may have done, or other maintenance kinds of things that have to be done. And this does not substitute for the quarterly linearity. It's just in addition to. And as long as we pass that, life is good. All right, so we have our 3 levels, and each level is going to be calculated and averaged out to make sure that we do not go above 5% of the span of that instrument. As long as we've passed that level, then life is good, all 3 levels pass, the overall result is pass. Now, if we happen to pass using the alternate performance source, like we've talked about, that's what this would look like. So up here we have test passed, APS, and that lets us know that we use the alternate performance specification. As we come down, we can see where was the test, where the level that we used at. So in this case, our low level, the APS indicator is set to true. So that's why we have the overall result of pass APS. So all three levels or all three injections are going to be calculated, averaged out, and then that's the overall result for that particular level. And then each of the three levels have to pass in order for us to pass our linearity. If we don't want to report this particular test in the electronic data report or EDR, we can clear the checkbox there. If we lock the test, remember this just locks it from individuals going in there and actually manually editing any of the data. But that's not what we want to use at the end of the quarter when we submitted everything and life is good. That tool that we want to use is going to be our data locking wizard. With our data locking wizard, we can go into the system and tell StackVision exactly what we want to lock. So we can lock all of that data, and if we needed to unlock it, we could also come back in and unlock that data if we needed to work with it. But typically, once everything is submitted, it gets locked. You don't want to have to deal with it anymore. Now, once we've put the information in, two other sections that we might have to worry about on this test, we can add a comment if we wanted to. It's just a simple text. If we add in a comment, that is also going to be part of the record, so you want to be careful with that. You don't want to put in there, finally got this damn test done. No, because that's going to be part of the EDR as well. Our gas certificates, if we don't already have the cylinder management piece associated, we can click on our gas certificates and then go in and select which certificate or which gas bottle we wanted to use. But again, be careful with that. You want to be careful because you don't want to pick a bottle that is not the right one. If we needed to at this point, we can click on our cylinder management and then we can go in and add all of the information in that we needed to put in. Right, so let's go over to our cylinder management. Oop. Why are you being a bugger to me today? All right. And this is a perfect teaching opportunity, perfect learning point. StackVision has given me some heartburn. It's not playing nice, so that's okay. I don't have to worry about that. I can just go in and I can launch another StackVision and go from there. So just bear with me while I do that. We'll switch back over to the presentation. Nice blue screen of death there for us. So don't think you're the only one that is going to have problems with your StackVision. We all have issues. And again, it's probably not StackVision, but my local machine. And we're back in business. All right, so we were working with the linearity and the CGAs. So we'll go back in there. And remember, we can find out when the test was done by going into Cal Lab or the Cal Detail Report and looking at the Q-type calibrations. Once we've done that, then we know when the test was actually done, and we can use our add icon up here at the top and select what we want to enter the test in as. So I'm going to select my linearity sequences or my Q-type calibrations, and that opens up the window for me with all of the different Q-type calibrations that were done within those particular quarters. Right, so I'm going to come in and I'm going to find when the test was done. We're going to say that in my organization, we did a test on, we'll say it was done on August 19th of 2020. So I'm going to get rid of all of these. And we'll say we did our CO high, CO high, CO high, 3 injections, and there is our test. Now in this case, it was our CGA. And why does StackVision know it was our CGA? Because remember when we looked at the parameter detail report and we looked at the calibration settings, we saw that CO low fell under permit. So StackVision went ahead and grabbed all of those injections, put them where they needed to be. For the linearity, we're going to do the same type of a thing, but this time we're going to use 3 injections for CO2. That brought it in for 3 injection levels, low, mid, and high, versus our cylinder gas audit, which was 2 levels. All right, so StackVision went in, it pulled that information in, it populated it where it needed to, and it calculated everything up for me. Now remember, if you have the gray background, you're not able to edit any of that particular data. So here, these are all gray backgrounds. I can't edit that. I can go into the white background or the clear background and edit that if I needed to. So in this case, if I needed to update my reference values here, I would be able to do that. But I could not update the SEMS value or the calculations. Now back in our cylinder management piece, if we use the cylinder management to associate the gas bottles with the particular tests, then we're going to be able to have that information already pulled in. So as I look at my cylinder management, I have this Q, CO, HCO2, and I already have bottles associated. So that lets me know that when I pull in that test information, these are the bottles that are going to be pulled in for that particular purpose. If I was doing this particular one here, the Q NOx, I'm going to have to enter in a value for my mid because I don't have one associated. So again, I want to make sure that I've already got these things associated so that when I pull that data in, I don't have to worry about setting anything else up in that test. All right. We don't want to be in that StackVision because that one boogered us. Now, that's putting the linearities and the CGAs in. And then the only time you're going to see a difference between linearity / CGA is when we go into our reports. When we go into our reports, under our QA certification, under Part 75, we're going to see the linearity test. And when we go under permit, we're going to see the cylinder gas audits. We're going to see the same information in the reports as we saw in the actual test details, just arranged a little bit differently. So here is a cylinder gas audit report. That might be a little hard to see, so let's change that. So here is the cylinder gas audit that I did on my CO high. It was done on 8/10 of 2020. And here's the injection levels. Low, mid, high, or the 3 injections at each of the test levels. You can see the cylinder information would be pulled in if I would have had cylinders associated. The overall test results in each of the different levels. Same information that we would see in the tool. If we go into Part 75 reporting, QA certification, Part 75 linearity. And there's our linearity tests. But again, that information is not going to be there until we go into StackVision and say, yep, use this particular piece for the purpose of our tests. If we don't do that first, that information isn't going to show up as the test information. Even though we did the test, it doesn't show up as the test record until we say use it for that test purpose. Any questions on the cylinder gas audit or the linearities? All righty. Then let's switch back over. And now we're going to talk about the relative accuracy test audit, the RADA test. And let's just get rid of this. All right, your relative accuracy test audits. They're typically going to be conducted by an outside source. Now, when I say an outside source, I'm not talking about Joe Blow's testing agency up the road. It could be an outside source from your own organization. Some of your bigger organizations that have many, many plants, they have a testing group that will go around to all their different plants and do the tests. So even though they still work for the same company that you do, it's considered an outside source. Basically, it just means that it's somebody else's test equipment to make sure that your test equipment is reading the way it should. And that's what the relative accuracy test audit means, is to determine your system's accuracy by comparing your data to the tester's data. And it must be relatively accurate by 10%. Now, RADAs are required semi-annually, which means every 6 months. But every time I do a class, people are like, whoa, wait a minute, we only do ours once a year. Well, that's true too, because if you get your relative accuracy down to 7.5% or below, you go on the reduced frequency or the annual scale. If you're between 7.6 to 10%, then you're required every 6 months, semi-annually. To conduct a RADA, you have 9 runs, and a run consists of 21 minutes of valid data. So the tester is going to look at 21 minutes of data. They're going to average that out. They're going to look at your system for 21 minutes worth of data, and they're going to make sure that they are the same, relatively accurate. Now, you can do as many runs for a RADA as you want to, but you have to maintain a minimum of 9 runs. A lot of times folks think that the maximum you can do is 12 runs because you can only throw out up to 3. Well, you can only throw out up to 3, but you can do as many as you want. You can do as many as you want, but you have to maintain that minimum of 9, and you can only disregard up to 3 runs. StackVision will figure which 3 you want to throw out for you. You won't have to go in there and do some manual calculations and try to get everything matched up. StackVision will figure it out for you. RADA tests are required for all gaseous and diluent monitors as well as stacked volumetric flow monitors. And just like the other piece with the linearities and CGAs, we have a RADA tool. And we can access that tool through the QA certification tool and RADA. We can also launch the RADA tool through the right-click options in SemScape and select Edit Selection or Network and select RADA. That will also open the tool for us. Just like the linearity tool on the left, we see that we have all of the filtering options when the test was actually selected. And when that information is put in, we then see the data grid with all the test results. This gives us the options to add a run, and some folks will do that. They will add the runs as they occur, or they will come back after the fact and put it all in at one time. Now, your tester is going to give you a report, and sometimes you don't get this report for 6 weeks after the test was done because they've got to go back and compile everything and calculate, make sure everything was right. and then you wind up having to go back in and change your records, and that's okay too. Sometimes they will give it to you in an electronic format, and then you can just import that into the StackVision tool, and it will go ahead and populate and calculate the way it needs to. So we can add runs, we can view the minute data from each run, we can run a test report, a detail report, we can switch between load levels, we can view the flow details for flow ratas, lots of options that we have within that particular tool as well. To add a test, we click on the add icon, and this is a little bit different because we have to tell StackVision what it is that we want to use the test for, or what we want to do the RADA test on, and then which level that we want to do it on, low, mid, high, or the normal level. And the normal level falls into play when you talk about load bins and range of operation, and it is just a whole rigmarole. Then you have the total number of runs, and you can select anywhere from 9 up to 150, I guess. I don't know. But you can put your number of runs in there and how long each of those runs is, and then when was the actual test done. When we first create our test, we have this blank screen with a bunch of red all over it. And basically, when we've gone in and we say add a test, we've taken a box with manila folders, opened one up, and wrote RADA and whatever year it is on there. We haven't put the papers in the folder yet. And that's what we're looking at here, is just the folder with no papers in it. All of that red indicates that those tests are overlapping. And as we enter in the information on the test, it will start to calculate so that we can see exactly where everything went. Now, once we've got the information in there, we can go ahead and retrieve our minute data using the retrieve icon, and it goes out there and it gets all the information from the SEMS data. So that's your data. And then based upon what your tester's data was, this would be your tester's data, and this would be your data, and then the system will go ahead and calculate based upon those two, and then give you the overall results. Now, StackVision will go in, and you can use a little magic wand there, and it will optimize the test for you. And what that means is that it will go through and it will calculate which of the 3 least desirable runs for the purpose of reporting. And it will clear the check mark over here on the left-hand side that shows you whether we're going to use this particular run in reporting or not. Several years ago, the EPA came out with what was called the Air Emission Testing Body. And the regs state that the Air Emission Testing Body must have a QI, qualified individual, on site whenever a RADA test is done, and NOx correlation test for those appendix units that we talked about earlier in the week, or for any low mass emitters default testing. So the qualified individual has to be on site. The regs do not state that they have to oversee the test, they have to QA the test, they have to participate in the test. It just means they have to be on site. So I guess they could be in the trailer drinking coffee and eating donuts, but they were on site. But they might not want to do that because they're the one that's going to be on the hook if something goes wrong, because they were the qualified individual. They should have known what was happening. So the qualified individual's name gets associated with each of your RADA tests. You have their name, the company name they work for, when was their exam, and then additional optional data fields for the middle initial and any comments that you want to add to this record. And I'll show you this all when we get into StackVision. But to be a qualified individual, you must have a certain number of tests that you participated in experience, or a certain number of years of testing experience for the test that you're trying to be a qualified individual on. Then you have to take a very rigorous exam, and I say very rigorous because I've heard that most folks do not pass it on their first try. There's many sections of it, and they bomb one section, and they have to go back and take the test again. And then that exam status is valid for a period of 5 years. And StackVision will know whether or not you can use that particular individual's test record. Qualified individual, again, participated in at least 10 tests for which they're seeking qualification, pass the exam, and maintain a signed statement on file agreeing to conform to the quality manual. So let's go into StackVision and let's see exactly where we put our RADA information. So we're going to go back up to our tools, QA and certification, and our RADA. So on the left-hand side, again, we see a filter for all the tests that were done. And notice now we only have 2 parameters for our RADAs, because again, that's what's been set up in the Stack Studio configuration. As I look on the right-hand side, I see my test details over here, and I can just click on that and see the test as it's in the system. So here's an example of a completed RADA test. This was done in 2016, and the RADA becomes effective the hour after the last run was completed. So if I look at this, I scroll on down to the last run. The last run was completed at 15:20. That's why my RADA became effective at 16:20. So that means at 16:20 and everything going forward until the next RADA, these are the results that are going to be used for the purposes of calculation. Now that's important because understanding the bias adjustment factor and what that bias adjustment factor is important, because if your numbers are different than what your tester's numbers are, then we have what's called a bias adjustment. And that's a multiplier, and that's going to bring your numbers up to the tester's numbers. That is also going to be used for anything that this particular component touches. So we're looking at the Knox pounds mm, and if we think back to Semscape, if we looked at all the things that Knox pounds mm impacted, then any bias adjustment is going to be applied to that as well. And that's important to remember, because sometimes you might be looking at data in Data Lab and the bias is applied, and then you may run an average data report and the bias is not applied and the numbers look different. You're like, uh-oh, what's wrong here? We got a problem. And you really don't. It's just that the bias has not been applied on one where it has been applied on the other. The bias is also important because that bias takes effect at the same time as the RADA becoming effective. So starting on 1620 on February 10th of 2016, I had a bias of 1.0, which in this case really doesn't amount to anything. But if it did, then everything going forward would use that bias adjustment. That's important to understand as well, because if your RADA happened in the previous quarter and you didn't get your results until this current quarter, you have to go back and calculate the bias adjustment factor into everything up until the end of the previous quarter. Reason being is because when process now kicks off, it only goes back to the first day of the current quarter and processes through the last full day of data. So if you had a bias adjustment factor at the beginning of the quarter, but StackVision doesn't know it because you didn't have the results in yet, you've got to go back and recalculate that. So you want to remember that in case you have to go in and do your RADA test from one quarter into the next quarter. All right, so here are all of my runs. On the left-hand side over here, I can see them numbered, and then the dates and times that the test was done. So if I want to put a new test in, I'm going to come up here to my add icon up at the top, and I'm going to select what it was that I did the test on. It was my Unit 1. We'll say Knox pounds mm. And how many runs did I have? Well, I can go in there and I can change those, and I can bring those up to as many as I need to. Or I can just use the standard 12 because what's going to happen is StackVision is going to throw out the least 3 desirable runs. What was each run's time? 21 minutes. And we did our test. We'll say, we'll just make a copy of this test here that we're doing. So 1/17 of 2021. Now I got this blank page, so my folder is empty. I've got to put the papers in my folder. Notice that right now this test is considered as failed because I don't have any data down here, and I've got all this red down here. Well, what this red indicates is that my test times and dates are overlapping. So I'm going to go ahead and just say that we started our test at 8 in the morning. And now you'll notice that I need to retrieve my minute data. So to retrieve my minute data, I can come up here and click on my Retrieve Minute Data icon. But let me put some more in here. And of course, in a perfect world, we're not going to have our tests being done in half-hour intervals. So now when I go and I click on my Retrieve Minute Data, that information is pulled in from my SEMS database. So it goes out to the SQL database, it grabs that data, and it pulls that all in. Now, if I put in my tester's reference values, StackVision will go ahead and calculate based upon that value that I've put in and what the overall results were. So I'm not going to go through and do the entire 12 runs. I'll just jump onto another test and show you. All right, so now I'm looking at my overall relative accuracy, and in this case, my overall relative accuracy was 0.09, so life is good. So I have to do it every 4 quarters. So once a year, I'm going to do my RADA. However, if my overall relative accuracy was different, and I'm going to put the checks back in the blocks. Now my relative accuracy jumped all the way up to 0.12. I'm still under the 7.5, so I'm at every 4 quarters, so life is good. But let's grab another test. And see what we can do with that. All right, so here we have an overall relative accuracy of 2.61. If we put those 3 that StackVision threw out back in, now we're at 5.17, so life is still good. But if we want to get rid of those particular tests that StackVision doesn't like, we can click on the Optimize button, and StackVision will go through and it will pull in, get rid of the 3 least desirable runs. Again, your RAD is going to be effective the hour after the last run was completed, and that means that that bias adjustment and the overall relative accuracy is going to be used until the next test is completed. You'll also notice that we have our qualified individual's name associated with the test. We can see when their test was, their qualified individual exam was done, and we can see if we're going to be able to use them or not use them. Now, we can put our qualified individuals' names in over here on this particular page, or we can put it in from the test details themselves. As long as we have them in there, then we're able to actually grab that qualified individual, and we can have more than one qualified individual that's associated with our tests. Now you'll notice that the association for the following QI is not saved. For QI Cassius Clay, the exam date is after the begin date of the test. So that would be giving us a critical error in the ECMPS when we try to submit that particular test at the end of the quarter. So it didn't let us do that. But we're able to go in and actually grab that and plug those in. questions on your RADA. And of course, by the time your RADA comes up, you will forget everything that we've talked about here, and that's okay. Just remember that you've always got some help that's out there. Whenever you're working in StackVision, you can hit the F1 key, and StackVision is going to open up help in a browser window for that particular area that you happen to be working in. And it opens it up in a browser window so that you can jump back and forth between StackVision itself and the help file. Now you have all of the help files, it just focuses in on the particular area that you were working in. There's also some snippets out there on our website, just real quick, down and dirty recordings of this is what you do, this is where you go, this is how you do it. So there's always some assistance for you out there if you need it. All right, you have some other QA tests that might be required. Things like your stack flow monitoring, your flow to load, your leak checks, fuel sampling data if you've got fuel samples that you got to put in there, your opacity test audits, putting that information in, all available within StackVision. And then wizards are available to assist in this data entry, and each of the tools is going to be, you have the help files for those, like I just showed you, hit an F1, or you can go up to help on the tool menu, or the drop-down menus, and select StackVision Help. Sometimes in the actual tool itself, you'll see a question mark, so that you can click on that and go into the help files as well. So let's jump into system monitoring now. And system monitoring basically focuses on three main areas: alarms, communications, and calibrations. Now, I think we've pretty much beat the calibrations up, so we don't want to beat that dead horse anymore. So we'll jump into talking about the alarms. You have your active alarms, and you have three different types of alarms. You have a system alarm or a data alarm, which is anything that has the ability to impact your compliance. This might be things like failed calibrations, exceedance alarms, out of control alarms. These are all things that might be able to impact your ability to be compliant. Then you have a system alarm, and this is an alarm that's anything that impedes StackVision operations. Examples of these include things like your disk space is running low on your StackVision server, or you have a communications error, meaning that the data controller is not communicating with the StackVision server. And then you have the application alarms. And the application alarms, these are just conditional alarms to let you know something has happened outside of StackVision. For example, ESC support has logged in or out of your server. And that's how the ESC folks, if they do log in, the folks being the support people or the engineering staff who's configuring your system, anytime somebody from ESC remotely accesses your system, they should be logging in using ESC support as a username. Or if Process Now has some type of an issue where it's not able to process the data that we've asked it to, we should get an application alarm. Now on your StackVision main screen, you see that you will see that you have a ribbon in the lower left corner that we talked about on Tuesday that is the total number of alarms that you have in your system. Now you can access the active alarms in your system by going into the View Active Alarms, or you can go under the Task Explorer Active Alarms, or you can select the ribbon down there in the lower left corner, which has all of your active alarms. And this ribbon is going to show you how many of each type of alarm that you have in your system. And these are active alarms, meaning they have not been acknowledged, they have not been returned to normal, they are still active alarms. The fourth way that you can access your alarms is through the annoying pop-up window. The annoying pop-up box that comes in when the alarm comes in and it goes beep, beep, and it keeps going with that noise until you click on this box. Well, this box can be filtered out per user. So let's say that Dan Bell is in there, he's working on some stuff and he's reviewing some data. He doesn't need to be noticing when you have a drift alarm because the techs are doing a calibration and we got a drift. So he might filter out data alarms that he doesn't need to see those. Or maybe you're the technician that takes care of the system. So any data alarms comes in is what you want to be notified of. You don't need to know about the application alarms or the system alarms, so they can be filtered out for you. And that's a useful tool because sometimes our alarms are set up and people go alarm blind, meaning the alarm comes in all the time. We really don't care about it. We don't think about it. It's got nothing to do with us. So we can set things up so that the alarms that do come in and you are notified of are important and do need your attention. So it gets rid of all those nuisance alarms, if you will. All right, so for an active alarm to no longer be active, it has two things that have to happen. It has to be acknowledged and it has to be returned to normal. When we acknowledge an alarm, we're not saying that it was a good alarm or a bad alarm. We're just saying, yep, we know there was an alarm. When we return it to normal, the condition which has caused that alarm has been removed. So if we had a drift alarm that came in, the next time the system checked and the system was no longer in a drift status, that alarm would return itself to normal. Or we might have to go in and manually return it to normal. And you're going to see that as we get into it. So we have to acknowledge it, and we're going to see acknowledged but not returned to normal as a status. Or we'll see return to normal but not acknowledged as a status. Or we will see not acknowledged or returned to normal, which would mean that it was outstanding. Now, all of your alarms can be filtered out for several different pieces. The state of the alarm, the description of the alarm, the dates and times that it started or it ended, what plant or source is this alarm associated with, or the parameter that it's associated with. When we look at our alarm panel, we can see where we can filter those out. We can also sort these. We can also apply colors to our alarms. Now the colors can be used, I've seen them used a couple of different ways. I've seen them used in the sense that if it's a red alarm, that's a very, very important alarm. You need to call somebody when that alarm comes in. Or if it's a red alarm, only a technician can acknowledge that alarm. If it's a yellow alarm, an operator can acknowledge the alarm, but they have to call a technician. If it's a green alarm, it comes in, it's got a low importance, we don't have to drop everything and run and acknowledge that alarm, or even basically pay attention to it. Somebody else is going to deal with that. So just different ways that you can use the colors, and you don't have to use the colors. It's entirely up to you. And you'll be able to change the colors as well, just like we did in our data lab piece that we saw yesterday. We can change those colors to better meet our needs. The alarm status bar, we talked about that a little earlier. It shows you a continuous status of the active alarms. And if we click on that, it will bring us into the active alarms panel. When we acknowledge an alarm, we can do this a couple of different ways. We can do a right click on the alarm that we've selected. We can double click on the selected alarm, or we can select it and then use the acknowledge icon from the toolbar. So 3 different ways that we're able to acknowledge the alarms. We may or may not, depending upon the way that our systems are set up, have to enter a reason or an action code for our data type alarms. A reason code is why did it happen? The action code is what did we do about it. Now, these reason and action codes are then going to be committed to the data in the database, and we would have to go into Data Lab to be able to change those or update those. And this is where I was talking about the other day, where your environmental folks are going to be reviewing the data on a quarterly basis, and they're looking at exceedances and downtimes, and an alarm is associated with that, and they look to see what the reason and action code was that was associated when that alarm was acknowledged. If they've put the wrong reason and action codes in there, they're going to have to go in using Data Lab to go ahead and make the right ones be in there. But that's only if you're required to put a reason and an action code. Not all of your alarms will, but I'm going to show you a way that you can figure out whether you need it or not. For my system alarms, I can acknowledge those, and I can enter a memo if I want to. I don't have to, and then click on OK. For application alarms, double-click them, they're gone. You don't have to put any memos, you don't have to put any reason or action codes, just double-click them, they're no longer active alarms. Once an alarm comes off of the active database, it goes into the historical data. And what that means is that the only way that I'd be able to see that alarm is by going into one of the two reports associated with alarms. I have the alarm history report, and that alarm history report is going to give me choices. So if I wanted to see all of the alarms that have come in on the Unit 1 CO2 analyzer in the last 6 months, I'm going to go into the alarm history report. The comprehensive alarm history report doesn't give me any options or choices except for a beginning and ending date and time. So that's pretty useful if, let's say that I've been on vacation or out sick for the last week and I want to see what went on in the plant. I can go ahead and I can do the comprehensive alarm report. That will show me all of the alarms over that period of time. But if I only want to see certain alarms that meet certain criteria, then I'm going to use the alarm history report. So here's an example. The alarm history, you can see that I have the choices of what types of alarms I want to look at, what source it was that I wanted to see, what parameter was associated with that, whereas the comprehensive alarm history, I only have beginning and ending dates that I can use for my choices. Here's an example of what my alarm history report looks like, where I've selected the alarm history from the reports, and then I've got the actual criteria that I've selected on the report itself. Whereas the comprehensive alarm history, it just pulls everything in, separates them by the type of alarm, and it's just every alarm that came in between that beginning and ending dates. Let's go into StackVision and we will play around with some alarms. All right, 4 different ways that I can get into the StackVision alarms. I can come up here to view active alarms. I can use the home screen from my Task Explorer, active alarms. Or I can come down here to the bottom to my ribbon and select active alarms, or that annoying pop-up box. But like I told you, that pop-up box can be filtered out per user. So if you're a user who has administrative access, that means you have the ability to go in and basically do anything in StackVision. You can come up to Configuration, Alarm Pop-up Filters. And then on the left-hand side, where the Task Explorer was, you see a listing of all of the users associated with your system. So here is the admin user. If I click on admin, you'll notice that the 3 checkboxes for show applications, show data, and show system alarms are not checked. So when the username admin is logged in, I'm not going to see any of those pop-up boxes telling me that an alarm has come in. Let's say old Charlie Chucklehead here When they've logged in, they're going to get all three of the alarm types showing. But maybe Charlie Chucklehead really is only concerned with whenever we have a low gas bottle. So I go in and I just make sure that Charlie Chucklehead has the cow gas bottles set to show the alarm pop up. Any other alarm comes in, Charlie Chucklehead's not going to get that notification. So that's just a way that you can filter those out, and you can make sure that only the right people are seeing the right types of alarms that they have in their systems. All right, so here's an example of my alarm page, and you'll notice that on the left-hand side, my views panel came up again, because this is a place where I can use my filters to segregate where my stuff is. For example, maybe I want to see any bottles in my, or any alarms in my system that have to do with calibrations. So I'll create a custom filter, and in my custom filter, I'll say the description contains CAL. So now I have my CalGas low alarms, I have my NOx low, my failed cals, drift limits, and then I can save that as a view, and I'll call this online alarms filter. And I will share that so that anybody that logs into my system will have the ability to look at that particular view. So if I come back into my alarms, on the view side of the house, under the shared section, I go under active alarms. There's my online alarm filter that I just created. And I double click it, and that pulls in that particular view for me. So let me close this Task Explorer. We'll clear our filters out of this view. All right, so we're going to see one of three different states on our alarms. We're going to see outstanding, we're going to see return to normal, or we're going to see just acknowledged. And I'm going to go ahead and just acknowledge one so that we can see what that looks like. All right, so the green check mark acknowledged, the yellow triangle return to normal, and then outstanding. So the outstanding alarm, both conditions have to happen. We have to acknowledge it, we have to return it to normal. The return to normal guys, we just have to acknowledge those. The acknowledged guy, he has to be returned to normal. So both those conditions have to happen. Now when we acknowledge an alarm, we may or may not have to use a reason or an action code. Well, again, my reports, system design, alarm system design will generate a report that will show me, do I need to have a reason and an action code with my particular alarms. So we can see here in this example, if I have a Cal 60 5 times comes in, which is my 5-day drift limit is being hit, my data is going to be marked OOC, out of control, then I have to have a reason and an action code to acknowledge that. The same with my failed calibration. I have to have a reason and an action code. But these other ones, I don't. All right, so this is CalGas low. So I'm just going to acknowledge that guy. I don't have to put a reason and an action code in there. I can put a memo in there if I want to. And maybe I'll put my initials in there if I log in using a generic login. And I can force it back to normal. Now you say, why in the world would you want to force it back to normal? Well, maybe because of your configuration, the way it is set up, it has to be forced back to normal. You have to manually return that particular alarm back to normal. Or your system might be set so that on the next good check, it returns itself to normal. And I'll show you an example of that. Here we see these are returned to normal because when the alarm came in on 12/1, I had a low CalGas bottle. But then the next time it checked, my cow gas bottle wasn't low anymore, so it returned itself to normal. So those guys just have to be acknowledged. That's another great option of being able to filter your alarms out, is because I can go and get all of these returned to normal that have something to do with calibrations. So all of my cow gas low, this plethora of alarms here, and I can select all of those at the same time and acknowledge them all, or I can use my control key and click in the left-hand column. You'll notice the ones that are turning gray, those are the selected alarms. So I have the option to select multiple alarms at the same time. I'll acknowledge these. They're already returned to normal, so I don't have to force them. And if I do Control A, I will get rid of all of these alarms. System alarms, they're a little bit different. I'll turn these colors off. This might be a little hard to see. For a system alarm, I'm just going to do acknowledge it, and then I'll return them to normal. And they go away. Application alarms, if I had any, I would just double click them and they would go away. Now the colors, I can turn the colors on, and I can change the colors just by clicking on my little color icon over here and set those colors that works best for me. You might have somebody that's colorblind and only sees grays and clears, so you could use those. Whatever color it is you want to set them up with, you can go ahead and set those colors. Again, you don't have to use them if you don't want to use them. You'll notice that we have a little memo icon here, Edit Memo. Well, let's say Charlie Chucklehead went in and he acknowledged my alarms, but he didn't put a memo in there. Well, as an administrator, I can go in and edit the memos that have been put into my system, and I can go find that one that Charlie Chucklehead put in, and just go ahead and update that memo if I needed to. So lots of options there with your memos. To see my active alarms that have gone away or are now considered historical, again, I have those two reports, my alarm history and then my comprehensive alarm history. And again, the difference between the two is in the alarm history, I can ask for particular alarms. In the comprehensive, I only have a beginning and ending date as choices. Now, another part of monitoring our system is communications, meaning making sure that we have good communications between our data controller and our StackVision server. And there's lots of different ways that we can figure that out. If we look in the lower right corner of the screen, do we have our little satellite icon that shows whether we have problems or not? That's one way that we can tell. Maybe we run a average data report and see if we have some issues with our minute data. Maybe we look at Semscape. Do I have a problem here? For example, Logo 1, everything is green, life is good, I have no communications issues. But Logo 2, I got problems. But in my case, like I said, this is normal, so I don't have to worry about that. I might have a console. And we'll talk more about consoles tomorrow. I'll just bring one up here. Maybe. So I look at a console. Do I have values coming in? Do I have a communications issue? All these different pieces that I can look at for communications. So alarms, communications, and calibrations. And then the final piece of this is making sure that everything is where it needs to be. And we have a tool called the LogBook for that. And I can access my logbook by going into Tools, Logbook, or from the Task Explorer, I can go to Logbook. And And this is an electronic version of a logbook, and there's lots of benefits in using this particular logbook. And let me make this a little bit better for us to see. Where did you go? All right, there we go. All right, so just like with my other pieces on the left-hand side, I have the quarter and the year that everything was put into the logbook. This is a great filtering option because when an auditor comes in and says, I want to see all of the maintenance that you've done on your CO2 analyzer over the last 6 months. Well, if you hand them your big old paper logbook and they're scrolling through there and they say, hey, what's this chicken scratch say? And why does it look like page was ripped out? And what's it say under this coffee stain? So you can use this electronic logbook and filter it out for the time frame, what type of entry, what source, which parameter, which components, what particular user, or does it have attachments or not have attachments. So you can filter for all these different pieces and then just show them that particular stuff which is displayed in the right-hand side. With your entry types, you have several different default types, and these are not the be-all end-all, meaning that you can go into Stack Studio and you can add in an entry type if you wanted to. So when you add in an entry type, then that becomes available for you to select when you actually go in and have to use that entry type. So let's say, for example, that you are the environmental person and you want to have an entry type that has something to do with data review. You could go in there and do that as well. Enter that in as an entry type. Maybe you want to have an entry type that says bottle changeouts. Well, you don't need to worry about that because cylinder management is one of the entry types that you have the ability to have automatically selected. Maybe you want to have a shift pass down. Well, you could add that in using Stack Studio, and then it would become part of the entry types. Now, whatever filtering options you've selected on the left, in the middle of your page, you're going to see an overview of what those entries are. Okay, so you've got your acknowledgement of your alarms in here. You've got all of the different pieces associated with your logbook. And it's giving me heartburn again. So let's jump back. All right, there we go. So now in the middle section, I have whatever the filter options were that I've selected. And then on the right-hand side, I see the details associated with that logbook entry. Now, once a logbook entry has been put in, it cannot be edited. It can be updated or appended, but you cannot change the initial text entry. Another great benefit of using this logbook is there is no late log entries, meaning that I can go back in. Let's say that I did some maintenance last Wednesday and I forgot to put the logbook entry in. And every one of us that's ever entered a log entry has done late entries. It's inevitable. So in this case, when we put our logbook entries in, it will put it in on the chronological order when the event was actually done. So it does not look like a late log entry. Even though the event date and time will be in the past, it still puts it in the chronological order that it was put into the logbook. All right, so the first thing we do is we acknowledge we have our title that we put in there. What type of entry is it? Does it apply to a particular source? Does it apply to a particular component? Is this logbook entry locked? If we've locked it, then we can only make changes or append this logbook entry if we have the ability to unlock it. And in your user accounts, that's one of the options that you have as the role, is being able to lock or unlock logbook entries. All right, so if I want to add a new logbook entry, I'm going to click on my little plus sign, like everywhere else in StackVision where I have a plus sign. That is going to be my add icon. The first thing that pops up is a blank screen, and I can go ahead and put my title in there. What type of entry is this? Well, I can set up different default fields if I want to on the entry types. So in this particular one, the maintenance type, you'll notice I have a bottle pressure, I have a pump check, and I have a filter as fields that I can make entries in. Some folks, they find this logbook and they say, you know, I want to use this to do all of my weekly checks or my quarterly checks or whatever. So they make an entry type called weekly checks, and then they come in and they update their entry types by putting in the required fields. If I was to jump from my maintenance field into a data QA field, notice that I don't have those fields. But if I make it a maintenance, I've got those that I need to put in. So I'm going to put a QA/QC entry in. I'm going to say it was on Unit 1, and I did this last week. So I'm going to go all the way back into January, and I'm going to say that I did it on January 20th. And we'll say that I started it at 9 in the morning, and I ended it at 10 in the morning, so 1 hour. All right, so now you'll notice that we had a bunch of alarm acknowledgments, and those were automatically entered when we acknowledged those alarms when I was showing you the alarm piece. We also had cylinder replacements from when I was in there playing around with the cylinders yesterday. All right, so now when I save this, notice that right now it's the top entry, and it's that green background. It says online class. It's the top entry, but when I save this, it's going to go away. Where did it go? Well, it went down in the chronological order. So even though the event actually happened on 1/20, I was able to put that in today, and it did not show up as being a late log entry. Even though it does show that it was edited or put in on this date, it does not show it as a late log entry. So here's the date that it was initially put in, even though the event actually happened on January. Now, if I want to add to the logbook entry once it's been put in and saved, for example, let's go down here and we'll find this one here. Okay, this was originally put in on July 8th, and I'm going to add to this by clicking on my little append icon. And I will put in the appendage. This is added text. Now, I have a chronological record of any time this information was entered in. Again, I cannot change that initial entry that I made, but I can add to it. Now, when it comes to attachments, I can have attachments added into my logbook entries, and I can add as many attachments as I want to have. The only condition is they have to be under 256 meg, but I can have as many as I want. We, as ESC, recommend that you put the attachments into the database itself. You can attach a link based upon a file from the clipboard image, We recommend again that you store the file in the database. Reason being is, let's say that I have this as a link to another area in a network drive on Sammy's network drive. Well, Sammy, the supervisor, went to Tahiti and he got hit by a bus, so he's not coming back. So what do you think is going to happen with IT? IT is going to go out and it's going to get rid of Sammy, the supervisor's network drive. Well, now we've just lost our document. But if you attach it to your document and you store it in the database, it will automatically be pulled into the database and we are not going to lose our document. And then it becomes part of the attachments. We can just open it up after the fact. And you could use lots of different things to do this with. You could have a PDF file in there. You could have a Word document, an Excel document, whatever it is that you want to have in there as a particular attachment, and then open it up however you need to see it in your attachments. And again, I can have as many attachments in there as I want. I'm able to filter this logbook out to just show the things I want to see. Some things are automatically entered into the logbook. And if I click on my logbook settings up here, or my options, I can see what is going to automatically be entered in. So if I've made a change in Data Lab, I can require an explanation. If I've got into Cal Lab, I could require an explanation if I've changed something there. Stack Studio, if something's been changed in Stack Studio, it's automatically going to be populated in as a configuration change. Cylinder Management, if I've used the Cylinder Management tool and made any changes, whether I've added a bottle or I've switched a bottle out, it's going to put the information in there as well. Certain alarms, when they're acknowledged, they're going to be sent into the logbook, and those can be set up as well. I'm going to take you into Stack Studio very briefly. Just so that you can see where these entries can be set up and how they can be saved. And again, Stack Studio, not everybody's going to have access to Stack Studio or need access to Stack Studio. These are going to be the configuration pieces where you're actually able to go in and make configuration changes. And if you're not in that world, you don't want to be going in there and monkeying around with stuff. But in Stack Studio, if I come down to my system settings and I go to my logbook settings, here are all of my entry types. So if I wanted to have one in there that was supervisor pass down, I could add that in. And then when I save that, that would become part of my selections for my logbook. My logbook components, a big long laundry list of those different components that I can select in my logbook. Well, maybe I don't have all of these different things. Maybe I don't have a differential pressure, or I don't have a stack flow monitor. I can clear the checkbox so that when I'm in the data logbook, it's not going to be an available choice for me. Likewise, maybe I have something that's not on this list. So I can go in there and add that at this point. And then that would become part of my selection as well. With your alarms going into the logbook, you'll notice in this section we have a listing of all of our different alarms. And then are we going to send that to the logbook as an acknowledgement? Just putting a check in the block, that would put that particular entry in our logbook. Now, just like everywhere else, Stack Studio is very safe. You've gone in there, you've made some changes. As long as you don't click save, no harm, no foul. And you cannot save by accident, because when you try to save it, it's going to go in through and it's going to calculate and make sure that everything is the way it needs to be. And if it isn't, you would see an error list down here. So you really don't want to mess around in Stack Studio, but if you happen to get in there and you're poking around, you're okay. And that is our logbook. Any questions on anything that I have covered today? Alrighty. Let me jump back over into our presentation. Can we see a picture of the donkey? I might be able to do that, and there's actually 9 of the donkeys, and maybe I can get them all in one spot and get a picture of everybody. All right. So, what do we cover in our system monitoring? Well, we went in and we looked at the alarms. We looked at communications. How do we check to make sure our communications are working and everything is good? We talked about the consoles, being able to look at a console for our communications. Talked about our alarms. And then we talked about our logbook, all the different components associated with our logbook. The logbook settings in Stack Studio. Right. Let's see here in our chart or in our chats. Are the links in the materials tab for the recorded sections? Yes, they are. There, you should see links in there for the recorded sessions for day 1 and day 2. And then tomorrow or later today, I'm going to have day 3 in there as well. And you'll be able to go in there and get those recordings. So we covered system applications and system monitorings today. And in the system applications, we talked about span and range, using the linearity and cylinder gas audit tool, using the RADA tool, and looking at the new client tool QA test deadlines. We did not do that because we don't have that yet. In system monitoring, we talked about our communications and making sure that everything is where it needs to be, working with our active alarms, and using the logbook features to do what we need to do with our logbook. And that takes us to the end of today. So just like every day, I'll be here for a few minutes if you have any burning questions or desires. If not, I will see you fine folks or talk to you fine folks again tomorrow.